Chapter 4. In a small bedroom on the outskirts of London sat a young girl with thick brown hair and intelligent, warm brown eyes. Her face was blank, her body stiff, and if you were to only glance you would swear you were looking at a fresh corpse. Hermione Granger was a smart young witch with unquestionable loyalty towards Hogwarts, the Order, and one Harry Potter. On her bedside table sat several empty potion vials. Her regime of medical potions was currently ongoing after her run-in with Dolohov in the Department of Mysteries. An orange fur ball, or Kneazle, was sat on her lap, basking in his owner's warmth. A light tapping could be heard at her window, but no movement was forthcoming. As the taps became increasingly loud and his master's body still unmoving, Crookshanks, the ginger half Kneazle, lifted his head and uttered a single meow before licking his paw and going back to sleep. The sound had the desired effect, and Hermione carefully lifted her beloved pet onto the bed, and once he was deposited safely, sped to the window. As soon as she had opened the small window, a white blur zoomed inside, allowing her to close the window on the miserable storm that raged outside. Hermione spotted Hedwig, leg outstretched in her direction, sat on the back of her desk chair. A faint smile appeared for a few seconds as Hermione gazed at the snowy owl with fondness. "Hi there, girl. What have you brought me?" "Hoot." Hedwig flapped her somewhat sodden wings and pushed her leg out more, trying to retain her balance on the wooden chair. With a giggle, Hermione moved forward and untied the missive from the beautiful bird's leg and proceeded to sit in the chair. Hedwig, realizing that her perch had been compromised, flew to the top of Hermione's wardrobe and proceeded to groom herself. Unfolding the parchment, Hermione set her eyes on the familiar scrawl of her best friend. "Dear Hermione, I hope you're feeling better, and I hope that Madame Pomfrey's potions are working well. They should be. I've never found myself with a magical condition that she cannot fix, and you know I've had plenty to date. I just want you to know how terrible I feel about getting you hurt. I should never have brought you guys to the ministry. It was only me they wanted. No one should have gotten hurt. I received a letter from Gringotts yesterday. I certainly wasn't expecting it, as I've never received one before, but when I opened it, it had their seal, so I don't think it's a fake. Can you even do that? Add someone else's seal to a letter, I mean. Guess I should have paid more attention in History of Magic, huh? Oh well, I doubt that Dumbledore will let me go anyway, even if it is for Sirius's will reading. Could you please look after Hedwig for a few weeks for me? My Aunt Marge is visiting, and she never comes without her dog Ripper, and I'm worried about what she would do if she saw Hedwig. The only creatures that she reacts favourably to are her ruddy bulldogs and my cousin. She normally only stays for a week, but I haven't heard how long she will be staying yet, so can you please look after Hedwig until at least the 21st of July? Feel free to send her out with any letters you want to send. If you must send me letters, Hermione, and we both know you will, tell her before each journey to only drop the letters off if I'm completely alone. She's a smart girl, so she will understand. Again, I hope you're feeling better and have a great holiday. Harry Potter. P.S. If you cannot look after her for whatever reason, please send her to Ron. I think she'll prefer it at your house, but I wasn't sure if your parents are taking on vacation this year." Folding up the yellowed parchment, Hermione bit her lip, grabbed a piece of her own parchment and a self-inking quill off the old desk and began to write a reply. Harry Potter watched sadly as his familiar's form disappeared into the distance. He hated having to bid her farewell for at least the next 2 weeks, but he understood the necessity. He only hoped that Hedwig understood also. It was currently just after 7 a.m, and he could hear the sounds of Vernon, Petunia and Dudley rising to start the day. The sounds of his Aunt Marge soon joined the familiar noises, and before long the voices passed his door completely, leaving him in silence for the next few minutes as he watched the storm rage on outside his window. About 10 minutes later, the familiar sound of the cat flap opening registered in Harry's mind, and he turned to see his Aunt Petunia's hand disappearing back out into the hallway. His aunt and uncle had installed the cat door a few years previously as a way of serving Harry food without having to put up with the freak. Harry didn't actually mind the cat flap, as it meant he did not have to see the Dursleys first thing in the morning. He was always worried that he would say something that would get him in trouble before he had a chance to wake up completely. Breakfast was always served to him this way. Lunch was normally a small portion of whatever his family were eating. As Dudley was still on his diet, this was not much more than a piece of fruit or a few crackers, and dinner was a 50-50 chance depending on whether he'd completed his chores and also what mood Vernon came home from work in. Today's breakfast consisted of a single slice of dry, slightly singed toast and a cup of lukewarm tea. Morosely, Harry ate the morsel and drank the tea, although he cringed as he did so. Half-cold tea was never appealing. The skin that formed on the top was enough to give him the heebie-jeebies, but beggars couldn't be choosers. Not knowing when he'd be let out of his room and to take his mind off his full and aching bladder, Harry decided to get started on his summer homework. Opening his trunk, Harry dug around until he found his History of Magic text and proceeded to open it to the required chapter. After rereading the section several times, Harry grabbed a quill, some ink and a piece of parchment and started the daunting task of explaining how the Goblin Rebellion of 1257 AD could have been avoided. It must have been after 11 a.m. when the Dursleys saw fit to let Harry out of his room. After receiving a 10-minute lecture from his uncle about the consequences of upsetting his sister or harming her in any way, he was free to use the toilet and sighed at the immense relief that it brought him. Walking into the kitchen to receive his first task of the day, Harry was dismayed when instead of the familiar form of his Aunt Petunia greeting him, the stout form of Aunt Marge came into his vision instead. Seated at the kitchen table, the woman in question was reading the newspaper and mumbling about the state of the economy and how awful it was that good citizens like herself were not commended enough for their patience with the lower class. Having only taken a few steps inside the kitchen door, Harry paused and considered a hasty retreat. His plan was foiled, however, when Ripper, Marge's favourite pooch, began to growl threateningly in his direction. At the sound of her ickle baby's distress, Marge lowered the newspaper and frowned. "You there, delinquent. What have you done to Ripper?" "Nothing, Aunt Marge," was Harry's anxious reply. "Ripper only growls at those who cause trouble," was Marge's reply. "You must have done something." "No, I haven't done anything." "Don't lie to me. Vernon? Vernon!" His uncle waddled his way out of the living room and quickly surveyed the situation. "Boy, what did you do now?" "Nothing, Uncle Vernon, I just—" "Don't answer back to your betters. Disgraceful child." The last part was practically spat at him by his Aunt Marge, and Harry realised he was not going to win any brownie points by trying to explain. Harry bowed his head in part answer and submission and awaited their response. "Stay out of our way today, boy. You can weed the back flower gardens, and mind you don't traipse any mud in the house, or mark my words, you will feel my anger." Knowing that arguing with his uncle about the weather would only anger his guardian more, Harry nodded once firmly and silently slipped out the back door and into the freezing rain. He had barely been outside for 5 minutes, but Harry was already soaked and shivering. Flashes and bangs from the thunderstorm could still be heard and seen in the distance, but that didn't worry Harry too much. He'd never really been afraid of storms. He guessed that was the result of being on his own as much as he had been, such as his time spent in the cupboard and behind the locks of his so-called bedroom. Unfortunately, his hand-me-down clothes were too threadbare to keep him warm, and Harry knew that if he tried to head back into the house before the flower beds had been weeded, that he would feel his uncle's wrath. Kneeling down on the soggy grass, Harry carefully started to pick out and remove the small seedling weeds, and also some of the larger ones that his Aunt Petunia must have missed or mistaken for flowers during his time away at school. His aunt loved to show off her flower beds, and although she was a competent gardener, she lacked the patience needed to remove all of the weeds. That job, as always, was normally one of Harry's during the summer. He was actually surprised that she would allow him to be so near to her prize roses, but he'd realised soon after the first time he had been given the task that she would rather see him suffer without the use of pruning shears or gloves than worry about him ruining a few of her treasured roses. His aunt probably also relished at the thought of one of his Uncle Vernon's punishments were he to accidentally destroy a few of the precious blooms. Harry didn't know how long he'd been working in the garden, but the rain had slowed to a drizzle and he could no longer hear the distant storm that had raged earlier. A noise behind him disturbed his progress, and Harry turned to see his cousin Dudley shifting his weight back and forth a few metres away. Dudley Dursley was a younger version of his father. His hair was a sandy blonde, short and framing his pudgy face. Although his diet was working, along with a strict training regime for his wrestling prowess, his cousin still cut an impressive figure. His shoulders were broad, his arms beefy, and his fists clenched. Harry had been on the receiving end of far too many beatings by those knuckles, and wondered what his cousin wanted, and if he'd be able to escape before Dudley could reach him. "Hi," Dudley said so quietly that Harry almost missed it. "Can I talk to you a minute?" The surprise must have showed on Harry's face, for within the space of a few seconds, Dudley had moved towards him, hands held out in front of him, a gesture of peace. "I guess so. Sure." Standing up straight and flexing his shoulders, Harry turned towards his cousin, and out of habit positioned himself for a quick getaway should this be a ploy to begin a fresh round of Harry hunting. Harry hunting was a game that Dudley had begun back when they were kids, and involved his cousin and his friends chasing Harry throughout the neighbourhood, and if they caught him, Harry was normally rewarded with a beating. Luckily for Harry, his cousin had always been large, and so it was rare they caught him. They were normally only successful if Harry was focusing on one of his chores, or if he was hungry or recovering from one of his uncle's punishments. I just wanted to say thanks." Even though he understood the words, Harry was too shocked to really understand the meaning behind them. He didn't know how long he stood there gaping at his cousin, but he eventually regained enough composure to utter a single word. "Why?" "Last year you saved me. I'm sorry I blamed you for what happened, but Mum explained that those things, Dementors." Harry saw Dudley shiver and could see that he most likely was reliving the moment that one of the Dementors had caught him and come within seconds of sucking out his soul by the look in his eyes. Coughing gently, Harry saw Dudley stand up straighter, the haunted look not quite leaving his eyes, but he didn't seem to be stuck in his own mind any longer. "Dementor. Right." Dudley breathed deeply and continued his speech. "Mum told me those things were real. She told me she'd heard about them from her sister, your mum." He nervously rubbed the back of his head and stared at Harry. "After she told me, I figured I was lucky to be alive. Technically, Dementors don't kill. They suck out your soul and leave you a shell of a person." Harry didn't know why he explained them to his cousin. He guessed that he thought it might help, but if the look on Dudley's face was anything to go by, his cousin had found this information more disturbing than insightful. Harry saw his cousin's Adam apple bob nervously as he swallowed time and time again. There was obviously more that he wanted to say, and so Harry stood there patiently, waiting for him to regain his composure. "If you tell anyone that I thanked you, I'll beat you so hard you'll be in a world of hurt." The comment lacked its usual vitriol, but the meaning was clear. "Tell no one." "Don't worry, Big D," Harry replied with a glare. "I won't tell anyone." Dudley didn't even respond to Harry, and instead headed back towards the open kitchen door. Before walking inside, he turned and nodded his head, a small smile aimed at Harry as he entered the property, closing the door softly behind him. Harry stood still for a few minutes as his mind replayed the events of the past few moments. He couldn't be sure that this wasn't some elaborate joke due to his past with his family, but the more he thought about it, the more he believed that Dudley was being genuine. "Get back to work, boy. If you think for 1 minute that you can stop for lunch after standing around doing nothing, then you have another think coming." Vernon Dursley's voice rang out from the door which Dudley had just entered. Harry did the only thing he could and turned around to continue his chore.